going to go ahead and share, first of all, a little bit about our ministry and what's going on. Um, and if there's any issues with anything, somebody just wave wildly at me. But you can all see the screen about Devar Emmett. All right. So for some of you, it's a big review, but basically, Devar Emmett focuses on kids. All right, children, youth, young adults. I mean, yes, there's a synagogue now, and that's a whole other thing, and it's going well, to be honest with you. Or, I mean, we have about 20 people who are members. Pretty much all of them, but one person's actually a Jewish believer, and another. We probably have uh, about 40 or so people, 45 people maybe associated with the synagogue, actually. These are almost all, of course, adults. And of them, probably at least five are Jewish people, not yet believers, but are certainly in process. And we mentioned a couple of months ago, maybe longer now, Mildred Weinstein finally became a believer after 5 years, and unfortunately is dying. She's in hospice now, but continues to maintain a strong commitment to her faith in God and faith in Yeshua, which is amazing if you just only had known her 5 years ago. And so we're praying that as she passes away in the next couple of, unfortunately, next couple of months, that her daughter and son-in-law, and maybe other family members will at least be impacted. Maybe her daughter, who we've known for some time, would finally make a decision herself to believe. But this picture sums up who we're working with, and just squirrely kids for the most part. I'm not going to go into details of these kids, but some of them, two of them, all of them profess faith, except for actually all of them profess faith, but they're all in different stages of moving forward in their faith, and that's just the reality of it. But this is our vision statement. Devar Emmett Messianic Jewish Outreach focuses on meeting the spiritual needs of Jewish children, youth, and young adults. First through our own personal active outreach and mentoring, then through developing our expertise into programs and materials made available for others to use. And we've produced, whether it's Club Maccabee curriculum, Jewish liturgical items helpful within our Messianic Jewish community. One of the things I'm working on is a Messianic Jewish Haggadah, which you're going to talk a little bit about because I've been doing some additional research. But I just think it's important that we not only just do stuff for ourselves, but we package it in such a way that others can use it. There's no money in this stuff, but if it's not packaged properly, no one can really take advantage of it. Anyway, our ideas for the most part are plagiarized. I think of Awana, the Bronsteins in Chicago, Hilda Kozer in Coney Island. Your own work at South Park Church, has always been a great inspiration in terms of children and youth. And so we always like to give honor to those who come before us in terms of why we do what we do. And the question we have been confronted with is why reach out to Jewish youth specifically? I mean, why can't we just work with everybody or be more intergenerational? And so my answers are kind of here. One, most Jewish people come to faith in their late teens or early 20s. Even though Mildred came to faith in 94, generally I find that people are coming to faith when they're younger. And that's even true within the Jewish community. The children of Jewish believers need intentional spiritual mentoring and identity development to understand and effectively integrate their Messianic faith as Jews. This is something we discovered just because a lot of Jewish baby boomers came to faith, and I'm actually a Gen Xer, so I'm younger than them, and so I had the joy and the terror of watching their children grow up, and over half of their children are not walking in the faith. This is not only true in America, but when I go overseas to Israel, it's a huge problem. So the second generation of Jewish believers are tending not to come to faith. And the reasons are that there's not really a lot of good intentional spiritual mentoring going on with them. But also the second is they suffer tremendous identity angst. Okay. I mean, like if you're Jewish and you're in America and you're living in the Jewish community, and your family believes in Jesus, you're really torn as to how you relate to other Jewish people unless your parents train you to have not only a strong faith, but a clear understanding of who you are as a Jewish person. And that I find to be the same in Israel. And so a lot more I can talk about it, but it's a real problem. It's been something we focused on in our ministry, and we've seen God really use us in this. I mean, you got a picture here of a group of girls. The older girl in the middle with the flowery kind of dress is Allie Brewer, who's a first-generation Jewish believer who's part-time staff with us now, working with these kids. And all these kids are a mix of backgrounds. Three of them are from three of them are first generation, meaning they profess faith, but their parents don't. The rest, they are second generation. And it's just interesting to be able to see how this problem plays out, both in terms of faith and identity. Anyway, the last point is that you've got to have leaders tomorrow, so you better develop them the day. And that's something that's borne out in our ministry. Just have developed a lot of leaders. We count, probably close to 24 people that are in leadership within the Messianic Jewish community as a result of our ministry here in Chicago, which I always like to point out is not significant. Okay, group of crazy kids. Always got to start with them. The Club Maccabee program, which you've heard about, which is a curriculum like your Awana program, but it's specifically geared to Jewish kids for discipleship and evangelism. I always had a lot of unsaved Jewish kids coming through the program, although it's on hold because of COVID for currently. The second thing is Hederic Youth, which Hederic Youth is a number of things now. It's a camp we run in the summer. It's the Israel trip, which I'm going to show you a video of in a moment, a brand new video that I'm pretty darn sure none of you have seen before. And then our Winter Aliyah, which is a discipleship program, which we just had via Zoom back in mid-February. It also, there's just a variety, it's just too many things. So we'll move on. Okay, this was a picture of camp. This is actually, I think, 2 years ago. But you can see all those smiling faces. Yes, children. Okay, and this tells about the Hederic Youth. But I'm going to show a video of the Israel Aliyah and just mention, if you've worked with youth, if you worked with kids, you know exactly that when children are younger, obviously they're like sponges. They'll sponge it up, especially if you have a good environment and you facilitate relational interaction. Kids from troubled homes are a little bit harder sometimes, but there's still ways of working with them. High school kids start to drop out. I'm going to be going to see a kid a little bit later today who we've reached out to for years. His family are not believers, but they're Russian Jews via Israel. And yet they let us work with their kids for for probably 5 years now. But because there's nothing in the home, this squirrely kid he's lost whatever interest he's had in faith. And what overholds him to us is relationship. So I'm going to go and meet with him because he's depressed, like all the kids zooming in for high school, and just spend time with him. I'm going to try and look for some way to just kind of challenge him a little bit to move, in direction. And camp allows us to do that, which is why camp is so good. Get them out of their homes, get them into a place where we can work with them closely for a week. But the Israel Aliyah, which I'm going to show you a video in just a second, is a 3-week, almost 4-week program, which we've been doing for a dozen years, which you bring in Jewish kids who are professing believers, which doesn't mean that they actually are, okay? But we bring them to Israel. We work with them intensely for close to 4 weeks. It's discipleship oriented. It makes them think about their identity as Jews. They meet tons and tons of other believers, a couple dozen, easy, other Jews like themselves who are believers in the land of Israel, including Rachel's niece on occasion, Shachar Chalamish. And we just pray that God would really move them in a way that otherwise they wouldn't be moved. And so far, I think in the program, we've probably had about 60 kids go through the program. I wish I could tell you that every one of them is strong in their faith, but probably at this point, I'm sure at least 10 of them are definitely not believers based on what I can tell. They've just chosen to walk away. We've seen 5 of them move to Israel and make Aliyah and are doing very well for the most part in Israel, which is great. As a result of the program, we have seen close to a dozen, I think, that have moved forward into ministry in different forms in America and in Israel, actually both. And then personally, we've seen a couple of these kids go on to be leaders, lay leaders within our youth programming. So I think it's a successful program. But we finally produced a real video by somebody who's professional. So what this gathers, whether physically or in written form or whatever, you'll see how this program operates, and it's only about 3 minutes. So here we go.
Honestly, coming to the trip, I wasn't totally sure what to expect.
So some of my expectations were to be spiritually challenged and physically challenged, and that has proved to be true.
I definitely learned more about the Arab culture and how different it is in Israel than it is in America.
The relationship between religious Jews, secular Jews, Muslims, Arab Christians, and all of that, like all crammed in this tiny little space.
I learned a lot about my own Jewish identity.
I have learned to be patient and to wait on God, to be quiet, listen to Him.
Probably visiting the Holocaust Museum in Israel. That's probably the most spiritually impactful because of my favorite history.
Sitting at the Sea of Galilee and thinking about how Yeshua walked on it. That was very nice.
After all the hot days we went through, swimming really definitely was that icing on the cake.
Just be open to hearing what God wants to speak to you on.
It's been better than my expectations.
I'm doing it again. It's amazing.
All right. Okay, so I want to point out too, we actually are taking adults now. We have our second, we did a pilot, but we're going to do an adult Aliyah that's kind of based off the children's trip, or the youth trip, just shorter. It's only about 10, I think it's 10 nights, 11 days in the land. If you're interested, give me a holler. This will not be your typical church trip. So what have we learned? We've learned Jewish people can be reached, but it's hard. Youth work is extremely hard. I keep trying to remind my younger leaders that when kids choose not to do what they make good choices, that it's not because they're bad, just because people make their own choices. But you got to reach out to them, even if it's hard. Jewish youth today are mostly religiously ignorant. Many, though, are spiritually curious. Always stress spiritual formation. It's not about getting together with pizza and just having fun. It's always got to be the undercurrent has to be, what can we do to move these kids forward into relationship with God or in their relationship with God? Mentoring means modeling. You get what you show. I mean, if you are living out your radical faith, kids are drawn to that. And if you're being a hypocrite, they want nothing to do with you. Clarify and reinforce Jewish identity. So that's a lot of also what we do is, and we're going to talk about this in Passover, but to really help people understand what it means to be Jewish, to live a Jewish life. And a lot of the kids don't have a clue anymore as to what that really means. So you need to reinforce it and clarify it. And then radical faith is real faith, and keep a long-term perspective, just like a ministry in general, right? We always, as believers, we better be keeping a long-term perspective because the world is messed up. And we gotta remember only God's really the one who knows what's going to happen over time. So we better trust in him and know it works out right for all of us in the end. So if you have questions about our ministry, please talk to me. Otherwise, we're going to go into a Passover overview, and there are no videos in this. But I'm going to take us to this slide. Anybody familiar with this slide? Feel free to unmute yourself and tell me what it is.
Lord's Supper.
All right, Lord's Supper. Who wrote it, or who created it? The picture.
Da Vinci.
Da Vinci, the guy who wrote the code. Right, Da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, who, by the way, evidently was not a theist. Interestingly enough, he wasn't a believer by far. I could show you, there's an interesting Israeli mock-up of this. It shows a bunch of soldiers, but I'm not going to do that. What do you notice in terms of the table? What are some of the items you see on the table?
Bread and wine.
Bread and wine. What else?
Table linen.
Table linens and plates. Keep looking. What else do you notice?
I see Jesus's feet in this picture.
Yeah. Pretty much the figures' feet are showing. But what else on the table in terms of food?
And a fig.
Bread.
Bread? What type of bread?
Unleavened.
No, leavened. It's yeast.
Leavened bread. Thank you. Those are bread loaves. Little bread loaves. And you don't see any unleavened bread at that table. Because unleavened bread would look like what?
Flat like a saltine.
Yep, flat like cardboard is what I would say. What else do you see? Look again, keep looking at what other food. You got bread, you got wine. What other food is present?
You have a protein there, maybe lamb, maybe chicken. It looks like lamb probably.
Yeah. There are two proteins. So follow along with me. I don't know if you can see my mouse. You guys see my mouse?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a protein. We're not sure what it is.
Right.
But you know what they discovered? This protein over here, you know what anybody know what this is?
No.
Eel.
Oh.
Sliced eel with cucumber. Evidently, this is not a great, but they've done a lot of restoration work on this, and they determined that one of these plates is for sure sliced eel. By the way, is eel kosher?
No, I don't think so.
No, not kosher. any greens? Do you notice any greens on this table at all?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so what happened is Leonardo da Vinci wrote, or he created a picture, and this is very common in Christian art, all right, even in written literature and everything else. They created a Seder, but it's not really, it's not a Jewish Seder at all. This is actually just a Last Supper, as they would have envisioned it, as they would have eaten it. The only thing that really matters is bread, as they understood bread, and wine, as they understood wine, because all that mattered was the bread and the wine. Everything else was immaterial. But then you got to have food, right? So what do Europeans eat? There's every possibility this is actually pork over here, but this is definitely eel, because eel was a delicacy among the Italians in this era. Strange things, isn't it? Strange things. Okay.
Reminds me of roast beef.
Yeah, but it's not lamb. Pretty darn sure it's not lamb. But now contrast this picture with this picture. Anybody been to a Passover Seder? Yeah, yeah, Seders. Now a typical Seder, a Jewish Seder, looks like this. First of all, it's messy. All right, this looks clean, but really this is the beginning. It gets messy fast. All right. You notice the greens. Look at all the greens. Why? We'll talk about that. You got greens at the Seder. You've got a plate, a special plate with all these elements on it, and you got matzah. All right. Also at a Seder, you've got lots of wine, not just one cup. You got lots of wine because you've got requirements. And then there's these books. All right. These books are part of every Seder. Now, it's true that those books would not have been there in the time of Yeshua because they didn't have those things. But by the Middle Ages, definitely in the time of Leonardo da Vinci, we have Haggadahs that go back to the time of the Renaissance. So we have ancient Haggadot of Passover, and the books were used all the way back in the time of Leonardo. Why he didn't bother to take a look at one is beyond me, but he didn't. Okay, so what I want us to do is we're going to take a little bit of time to look at the scriptural background for Passover. I am currently writing, like I said, a Messianic Jewish Haggadah, and because of that, I'm trying to really differentiate between fact and fiction, as well as just hold on to the tradition. And so it's given me a chance to do a little bit of more recent study. But the two key passages, there's also a Deuteronomy 16 passage, but the key passages related to Passover are here. And I'll tell you what, since this is, I think we have the time, if someone can read for us Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 20, and if someone else can read for us chapter 12, verses 40 to 51. Two readers, that should do it. So who wants to volunteer and read? If you got it, just otherwise I'm going to call on somebody. Let's see.
I got it.
Okay, who's okay? Go ahead.
Okay.
Verses 1. Start with verses 1 through 20.
Okay, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. And tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons, according to what each can eat. You shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. And you may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover, for it will pass through the land of for I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over, and no plague will befall you to destroy you. And when I strike the land of Egypt, this day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations, as a statute forever, you shall keep it as a feast. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. And on the first day you shall remove leaven out of your houses. For if anyone eats what is leavened from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. And on the first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the 7th day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on those days, but what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared by you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a statute forever. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses. If anyone eats what's leavened, that person will be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a sojourner or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your dwelling places you shall eat. Wait a minute.
All
You
right.
shall eat nothing leavened. In all your dwelling places you shall eat unleavened bread.
Okay, very good. And then 40 to 51.
I can read that.
Okay,
Now, the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's division left Egypt. Because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt, on this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for the generations to come. These are the Passover restrictions. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "These are the regulations for the Passover. No foreigner is to eat of it. Any slave you have bought may eat of it after you have circumcised him, but a temporary resident and a hired worker may not eat of it. It must be eaten inside one house. Take none of the meat outside the house. Do not break any of the bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. An alien living among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all of the males in his household circumcised. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat of it. The same law applies to the native born and to the alien living among you." All the Israelites did just what the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. And on that very day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions.
okay, very good. So I wanted us to read that because that's really the best scriptural background we can find for the holiday. And it puts the most important elements on the table here. So in the red, you can see the major points. Passover is a holiday on a specific date. In chapter 12, verse 42, well, in 40 through 42, it ties when the Israelis went into Egypt with their going out, all occurring on the exact same day. In the Hebrew of verse 42, in that translation where it was pretty good, gives the definite sense that on the night of the 15th of Nisan, so that would be, you know, again, we start the day, Jewish time, you start the night, begins the day, all right? So that night is an eternal night of vigilance between God and the Jewish people. So the celebration of Passover has to occur on that time, all right? You can't celebrate it really, not really any other time of the year. And that's the point of that verse. So specificity in terms of the date is critical. It's a holiday of remembrance. That's when most people think about. You know, remembering the Exodus from Egypt, remembering the death of the firstborn. But also it's a holiday of restriction. In this passage, and this is also in the other passages, the other passage in, you see this in Leviticus, you see it in Deuteronomy, the people are to take a lamb, a sacrifice quality lamb, and they're to roast it. We'll talk about that in a second, you see it there, but a lamb with matzah and bitter herbs. So the food that is eaten is very limited, all right? You need to have lamb, you must have lamb, and along with it, unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And the bitter herb isn't specified, it's meant to be more general. It's something that's not so tasty, okay? So whatever that would be, we'll talk about the traditions. The location is limited in the sense that it needs to be a single location event. So you Exodus 12, it's in your home. The other text would basically infer that it's in the home. Passover is unique from other holidays. It's really a home-based event. All right, and you're not to go from one home to another home. One home only. And the approach, the lamb has to be roasted. I think someone made a noise or whatever when they talk about it has to be roasted with the legs and the internal organs. And in Jewish tradition, this is discussed, is that they would clean the guts of the animal, and the animal's guts would be roasted along with the animal. They would tie the what do you call it? Not the colon. What do you call it?
Intestines.
Intestines. Thank you. They would tie up the intestines at the head of the lamb.
Oh.
To roast it along with the lamb. Okay, fine. So, but there has to be roasted. No other way can it be roasted, and then it cannot be. The bones cannot be broken. Which back then people would break the bones because of the nutritional value found in the bones. All right, it's not like today where people, throw away half of the animal's potential nutritional value because they get all the best parts of the meat. So the lamb had to be eaten in a very limited manner. There was a lot of waste. And then the audience is listed as it talks about, you've got to have native born circumcised Israelis, okay? Otherwise you can't have guests. So that's the scriptural background for the holiday. Was there a question? Okay, all right, we can keep going. I'm gonna just, now the New Testament background. I want to point out, I wrote this in the Haggadah, there's only 2 instances of the Israelis celebrating Passover in the biblical text. Once when they came into the land at the conclusion of the Exodus, right, the conclusion of the desert wanderings under Joshua, and once under the final king, the good king Josiah, right? I got he's the right guy at the end of the book of Kings and 2 Samuel. So a good old King David never celebrated Passover, according to the biblical text
that we know of.
Yeah, well, based on the text, it's the text says that in 2 Kings, I'll read it real quick. Because if you never thought about it, I mean, it's helpful to remember that the disobedience under Josiah, the disobedience of the Jewish people was pretty extensive. And that included Passover. This is 2 Kings 23. It's under Josiah. It's under his revival. They find the text which had been ignored. And then in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 21, it says, then the king commanded all the people, saying, celebrate the Passover to Adonai your God, as it is written in this book of the covenant. For no Passover like this had been celebrated from the days of the judges who judged Israel, or in all the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. Think about Hezekiah, think about David, think about Solomon. None of them kept the holiday of Passover. That literally means Joshua celebrated it when they came into the land, and then for some reason they just stopped doing it. Probably just simply sin and lack of paying attention. Why are we commanded to do it every year? Because if we skipped a year, we'd probably just forget. You know? The literature is pretty clear. When you get to, and this is a whole lot longer thing we can talk about, but post exile, if you read Ezra and Nehemiah, Ezra begins to kind of whip the people into shape, and he establishes a calendar and the temple structure. All of these things start functioning according to what the scriptures command. So you begin to read in what is called Second Temple literature, or some might call it intertestamental literature, about the fact that the Jewish people are celebrating Passover. The things that they associate with the holiday are the eating of the lamb after sundown, but the roasting of it, the killing of it on the 14th, the eating of matzah, bitter herbs. There's a reference to something called charoset, which I'll talk about in a minute, as also being part of this. It's a celebratory event. They're actually rejoicing, having fun, and celebrating. And then they're singing Hallel psalms, which you can find in the biblical text, Isaiah, Psalm, 13, 15, those Psalms, Psalm 18. These are Psalms that are written probably post exile. All right, so these are Psalms not written by King David, because not all the Psalms are written by David. They're written in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, possibly as a way of helping to build a liturgy around the temple to encourage people to celebrate and worship God. Also, the drinking of wine is mentioned for the first time, because you'll notice we didn't read anything about drinking wine up to this point. All right. But what you do not find in any part of the this literature written before 70 in 70's year the temple was destroyed, is an order. There's no order of service. Now, when you look at the New Testament references, which are listed here, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John, what they do is they mention the holiday. There's a mention of preparation for the holiday. You get the sense Yeshua is very intentional in wanting to celebrate the holiday. Lamb, a bitter, dipping, matzah. These elements are referenced. There is an assumed order. And it's interesting. The New Testament is used by Jewish scholars to understand Second Temple Passover, because there is more in the New Testament, even though there's not much of anything. There's more in the New Testament that speaks about Passover than in most of the other literature of the Second Temple period. Okay. So an order is assumed, but it's not specifically given. So a clear order is only first found about 130 years to 170 years after the destruction of the temple. It's only found in the Pharisaic or rabbinic literature of the late Second Temple period in what is called the Mishnah and the Tosefta. These are two rabbinic documents. If your eyes are glazing over, I apologize, okay? I say all this because it's a bridge to what we see here, all right? This is a Seder plate. Maybe you've seen one. Here in the Seder plate, we list items. The Hebrew is on the graphic, but basically the Zoroa is the shank bone of a lamb right here, representative of the lamb of Passover. The maror, number 2, is this, what is here is a bitter root of a bitter herb. So the horseradish root, this is obviously Ashkenazi, a horseradish root. The chagiga and the betzah is the egg, a roasted egg, which reminds us of the temple's sacrifice. This not the lamb sacrifice, but a festival sacrifice. And so no longer a sacrifice, so we use an egg to remind us of that. The karpas is a green. If you remember this picture of the Seder dinner, the family was having, there was lots of greens. Well, that's the karpas. The karpas have to be a green vegetable, which is not mentioned in the book of Exodus or Deuteronomy. In fact, karpas isn't mentioned anywhere in any literature before the Mishnah. I want that to sink in, okay? It is a major piece, and the karpas is celery. You'll notice in this picture, they got potato, parsley. A lot of people use parsley, could be lettuce of some kind. But the karpas is a green, has to be a green item used to represent life today. And then the chazeret. The chazeret here, which looks like romaine lettuce, I guess, right? Is a bitter. It's a bitter vegetable. The word is used because it's an affiliated word. It's the biblical word used in the book of Ezekiel, but it's really what we make maror out of. All right, but it's added to the Seder plate to fill out the order. All right. All of this is added post-temple destruction. So what we look here at the modern Seder is and I'll try to put all this together, is the modern Seder today gives all kinds of rules and regulations about what is leavened and unleavened. All right. So if you know my wife grew up just a normal, what I call a normal Reformed Jew in Skokie. And so she doesn't understand why we can't have the Cheerios at home during Passover. And I tell her it has nothing to do with leaven. It has to do with Jewish tradition. Anything that has any of the grain elements listed in the Bible cannot be eaten. You cannot eat normal grain elements or have them in your house during Passover. You can only have special kosher for Passover grain elements. And so it's not even about leaven anymore. It's about tradition. So that's why Jews have these long sections in the grocery stores of what they can eat at Passover. It has to be certified kosher for Passover. So it's not about French loaves. It's not about, leavened products anymore. It's really about all this other stuff. And then once we remove the items from our home, we have to burn them. And you can't just throw them away. You have to burn them. All of that's now required according to tradition post-temple destruction. It has nothing to do with the time of Yeshua, okay? What is traditionally required at the Seder meal are these items. And I'm going to mention one that's not here that you're going to gasp about maybe. You're supposed to, by tradition, have 4 cups of wine or grape juice. And the wine that's used is supposed to be cut, so it's only about 5% alcohol. All right, which means it tastes lousy, actually. But 4 cups are required. There is absolutely no historical basis for cups of wine at all at a Seder. But definitely there's no requirement for 4 cups in Second Temple time. That's interesting when you think about Yeshua's Seder, okay? Ceremonial Seder food, as I just talked about, all of this is ceremonial Seder food. Of this, what is required? The shank bone of a lamb isn't required, the lamb's required. So the shank bone is just an empty reminder of what we're supposed to be eating. The maror, which is really the chazeret, the bitter herb we're supposed to eat, and the matzah, which isn't even on this plate, okay? So you can see all the additional traditional elements. All right, and then they're required in a ceremonial manner, all right? We have to do it in a specific way. We'll talk about that in a second. Haggadah is required. There has to be a narrative story today. You have to follow a specific order. And then afikomen is required today. It was not original. If you think about that final piece of matzah people eat after the meal, all of that is post Second Temple, did not exist at all. Okay, and if the only thing it potentially could remind us of is a small piece of lamb eaten ceremonially at the end of the meal, which seems to be something that was a part of the meal, but we don't know for sure because it's not mentioned in any of the literature from the Second Temple period. All right, so 4 cups, some ceremonial food, the Haggadah and Afikomen, these are required. You'll notice there's no matzah tash. I have yet to find any historical basis for a matzah tash at all. It shows up, only God knows where it came from, but it's not in any rabbinic literature that I know of before the Middle Ages. All right, and matzah tash is Yiddish. So it's quite honest, it could be just a European Jewish thing that developed in the Middle Ages, and that's how we got matzah tashes. All right, so the 3 matzahs together with the middle matzah, trust me, has nothing to do with Jesus, okay? Because it comes so far, 1,000 years after Jesus. Okay, the main key components of a traditional Seder, and this is good, it retells the Exodus story. The rabbis, who really are the ones who put all this together, they wanted to make sure that the people remembered the history of God's redemption. Because by the time this is codified in the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries, the Jewish people are under terrible stress, whether it's under the Parthians in Babylonia today, or the Middle East, under the Romans, which then become the Byzantine Christians, or later on the Catholic Christians. They're under tremendous stress. They need to be reminded of God's redemption. God brought them out of Egypt. God is going to bring them from wherever they're at, bringing them back to Jerusalem. It's extremely important that that story is told. The second thing is they're eating specific foods in a specific and ceremonial manner. They're doing that to have a mechanism to tell the whole story. All of these elements now are tied to different points of the story to remind them what God has done. So the Seder is fantastic. It's got all kinds of biblical value to it. It's just been put together by the rabbis, 700, 800, whatever years, but definitely not Second Temple. All right. So it's not exactly what Jesus would have done. And then the final point is you see added into the Seder clearly are expectations for Elijah, but you know what they don't, the Messiah is mentioned never in the Haggadah.
Wow.
There's absolutely no mention of Messiah in the Haggadah. Instead, there's a clear expectation for Elijah. Now, why? You also, it's possible when you get to the Middle Ages, and also, unfortunately, you've got the memory of false messiahs in Bar Kokhba in 135 or so. So I think that they eliminated anything to do with Messiah in the Haggadah because he can be assumed, but we're not going to mention him deliberately because there's too many crazy people going around with a Messiah complex that are going to start thinking it's them. All right. So we're going to talk about Elijah because nobody's going around talking about being Elijah. Interestingly enough, there is not a single instance I can think of in Jewish history where there was an Elijah figure, some false Elijah, only false messiahs. So Elijah is specifically mentioned, welcomed into the Seder. And the unspoken reality is that we're longing for Elijah because Elijah is supposed to come before the Messiah comes.
Okay.
All right. So that's why it's a key component. All right. So I know we're out of time here, but I wanted to do something a little bit different today that would give you an overview, and because we're going into Passover. Hope it didn't bust too many bubbles. Some people, like to think that Jesus took the afikomen and pointed to himself. That didn't happen. The matzahs back then, by the way, also were not striped and pierced the way they are today. They were much more like pita bread. Okay, so there's all kinds of things we project into the Seder that Yeshua celebrated that are from our own time. I can definitely tell you this: Yeshua's Seder consisted of matzah. It definitely consisted of bitter herbs, all right, some kind of a bitter, and there was dipping involved, okay? There was probably other additional foods because the animals were roasted on a spit, in ovens. This is probably, or they were roasted in Jerusalem because it had to be eaten in Jerusalem. So the people had to have additional food. So what it was, we don't know for sure. And what the order was, we don't know for sure. But Yeshua is definitely referencing himself as the ultimate Passover lamb. That's the symbolism going on. Okay. And he would have used a piece of matzah if that tradition is correct that the Mishnah talks about. He would have used that piece of matzah and followed up with himself. And I think that piece of matzah that is referenced would have been a perfect representation, but that's conjecture. So I'll take it or leave it. All right, any questions?
So Kurt, I was thrilled to hear that gefilte fish didn't show up on the menu.
Was not there. Only Ashkenazi Jews, by the way, so you're stuck with it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And I had a question. You mentioned that the Messiah was not mentioned. It makes me think of Isaiah 53. Who do they think they were talking about in Isaiah 53 then?
Jewish tradition says that is the Jewish understanding of interpretation is that Isaiah 53 speaks of the Jewish people. The suffering servant is the Jewish people suffering on behalf of the nations. That's an interpretation that was developed by Rashi. The early interpretation, and this is also an early rabbinic literature, says that the suffering servant is Messiah. But because of the suffering of the Jewish people, they came to associate themselves with that suffering servant. And you have to understand the horrific persecution, because Rashi, his time, and it was about the time of the persecutions from the Crusades. I mean, whole Jewish communities were slaughtered during the Crusade period. There was tremendous suffering. And so that interpretation was one they took upon themselves because they didn't know what else to do with it. It made sense to them, and it diverted attention away from it being a fulfillment through Yeshua.
Yeah, they didn't have the benefit of the whole Bible like we do.
Well, they would have had access to a New Testament, but I think that the Christian community at that time were the ones killing the Jews, so they weren't particularly interested in reading the New Testament.
Rabbi Levy, could you unshare your screen so that we can see everybody?
Stop sharing my screen? Okay,
Thank you.
there we go.
Okay. So I have a question about how Passover is celebrated today, because I was not aware that most of the elements are traditional as opposed to somewhere in the Bible or from the temple period. So I guess my question is, most Jews in America, my understanding is, are not the really Orthodox Jews. Many of them are Reformed, so they don't necessarily keep all the kosher rules. But do they do so during Passover?
It used to be that almost all Jews in America would celebrate Passover. Only the most secular or the most assimilated would not. Today, Passover observance is becoming less normal. So I would say today, probably only half of American Jews would bother to celebrate Passover on the first night of Passover. Used to be you'd celebrate 2 nights, a first and a second night. But now, if you can get half the community to celebrate one night, that's quite a deal.
Well, and my final follow-up question is, I always understood Passover, the Seder, to be a meal. I wasn't necessarily, and I guess I also heard that you had to get rid of all the yeast in your house. But I guess I wasn't aware that you couldn't, like you had to burn it, that there were all these other rules.
Traditionally, it's to be burned.
So keeping Passover would be really a tough job. You'd have to clean your house inside and out, and you have to get rid of all the food there and buy a whole set of new food just for that week.
Yeah, basically. And it depends. People have ways of approaching it because Jewish people don't want to just waste food. But some of it is you give it away. There's fictions. I mean, you can sell it. You can store it in a portion of your house and seal it up and then sell it. There's actually websites you can go to and you can sell your chametz online, and then it becomes someone else's. In the land of Israel, do you think in the land of Israel they get rid of all the chametz? No, the chief rabbi of Israel will sell it to like the Grand Mufti or something. He sells it so that it no longer is the possession of the Jewish community, and that's how they deal with it. All of this is neatly figured out within rabbinic logic, but my mentality is that we're supposed to remove all of the leavened products from our home. So it wouldn't include Cheerios per se, which I don't eat for Passover, but it would include bread. All bread has to be removed from our home, no exceptions. Even David, what is it? This new bread I've been eating lately. But anyway, you get the point.
Interesting. Thank you.
I find it interesting that they made a rule that you should celebrate the Passover meal every year. But then you said for the most of the Old Testament time, they didn't do it at all. I'm wondering, why did it become an issue? And is this something that the Pharisees foisted on the people, or what
Oh,
happened?
no, because God commands it. It's commanded to celebrate every year on that night. All the holidays are commanded.
But that was in Exodus, right? Which happened a long time ago.
Yeah. But when you read Exodus every night, every year you're supposed to celebrate this event. Leviticus 23, you're supposed to celebrate it every year. Deuteronomy 16, same thing.
So why didn't David and other people in the Old Testament celebrate it?
All right, that's a really good question. What it tells us is that even though they loved God, they weren't necessarily so good at keeping his commandments.
Well, isn't it also that they may have lost his commandments because was it Hezekiah, Josiah? They found some of the
Yeah.
the
I
laws
mean, there's
later.
all kinds of questions. I mean, I think that the best way to look at it is maybe in the Second Kings passage, he's being hyperbolic. He's basically saying no one kept it from, basically in essence, Joshua until now. And that's not entirely true. Maybe in David's time, they did celebrate it. But you got to remember, he also did crazy things. Like he left the tabernacle in Shiloh, or in the other location. He left the tabernacle in a location, brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem and made a different tent for it. Where is that in the text? That's not the way the thing is supposed to be done. Remember, they put it on a wagon? Well, because they were idiots and didn't read the text. I mean, I think that it's a reminder we're supposed to read the biblical text and study it deeply. And even though they're wonderful people, obviously they weren't doing what they should have been doing. They weren't celebrating the holidays. And Ezra, well, actually, the prophetic literature is constantly getting on them for breaking Shabbat, for not keeping kosher, for not treating their neighbor like themselves. Okay, so when you get to the post-exilic period where Ezra comes and he starts teaching them the law, what he does is he begins to lay down regular rules and brings order. And that's what you see in the post-exilic period. And it takes hold. The people are cured of idolatry. It doesn't happen anymore. The most David did was he instituted, like with Asaph, there's certain singing and certain things going on in the temple. But even then, we have almost no idea what they did in the temple. Yeah, just keep praying they dig up stuff in Israel. But we know, I don't know, it's a small thing. They dug up in an archaeological digging recently, they dug up a small pomegranate ornament that absolutely is from one of the hems of the high priests. Because that's what he alone wears this item on his garment.
Cool.
So that's pretty good. Right? So there's small little points of substantiation. But so far we haven't gotten a Haggadah from the first century yet. Maybe it'll come up.
So as a Messianic Jew, my name is Von Perengala and I'm not on the screen, but as a Messianic Jew, in your own personal relationship with Jesus, how do you personally encourage fellow Jewish Christians to celebrate this in the most intimate and personal, but yet still holding on to the value of the traditions that wouldn't necessarily make it just a ritual, but rather more personal?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's fascinating. The entire, what you call a ritual, the traditional ceremonial Haggadah commands personal intentional involvement. It is, the Haggadah says that if you're not thinking about this personally and really putting yourself into the entire story of redemption and praising God for bringing you personally from Egypt, then don't bother to celebrate Passover. You're not doing it right. So the part we tweak is we take that entire concept and we then also refer as appropriate, to what Yeshua did in providing full and complete atonement for our sins as the ultimate Passover lamb. That's what we add to the Haggadah. So yeah, it's fascinating. I didn't really go into it because there's only so much time, but the Haggadah as it developed is all about personal redemption. And so it makes it really easy to apply that into the life of a person.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, I mostly focus on Exodus and then the Gospels when it comes over to when it comes to the Passover. I think of the blood that was put on the doorway for the Passover, and then Jesus being the perfect sacrifice lamb. That's how I connect the two. And then when he had that meal in the upper room with his disciples before he left, those are the three parts I mainly focus on when Easter comes around. Those are the things I think of, how it all came together. All these other parts are very interesting to me. And it leaves me a lot to think about, and all the traditions that were added and what, was not celebrated. But at the end of the day, I'm going to focus on the whole spirit of the Passover.
Yeah. Well, when you look at Paul's writing about it in 1 Corinthians, I think it's, 1 Corinthians 11, but you also have elements that he references in essence in 1 Corinthians 10, I think. So what he does capture and he, focuses, really gets on them about is that in their context, to take what were these major spiritual concepts and to apply them into what they were doing was having a regular meal. What technically comes out is the Eucharist, which is really just a Greek word for the Lord's Supper, or communion. But the elements of personal redemption, intentionality, doing it thoughtfully, not just rotely or ritually. It really has to be deep, heartfelt consideration, and that's what he has and really is trying to get at in 1 Corinthians 10 and 11. So if what you're getting out of the text or the things you're talking about, that's what matters. So you're getting the most important thing out of it for yourself.
I have another question that has nothing to do with the Passover, but has to do with your ministry among the youth, which I thought was very interesting, especially when you talked about how difficult it is to keep them engaged and how we lose so many of them when they go off to college. So do you have any, thoughts, advice for people here who have kids or maybe grandkids they care about?
Yeah, you have to be praying for them all the time. And then you got to consider your testimony. If you do not model what I call radical faith, I heard this line. I can't remember who said it, but someone said a long time ago. If you're not modeling radical faith, don't expect your kids to become believers in our environment today. Everything that they're learning at school, among their friends, online, it's so anti-God that if they don't see the power of God in you by the radical nature of your faith, they're not even going to be that.
Looks like USBs.
They're just going to be nominal. And nominal faith is a big issue.
I got this, but I'm not
second, third
seeing.
generation Christians.
Excuse me, Fellowship Hall, could you mute, please? Because we're hearing you in the background.
I muted him.
Okay.
So that's one. Please, if you've got children or grandchildren, model radical faith. All right, they need to see your relationship with God, not just hear you talk about it. They need to see it. The second
Yeah.
is the importance of communities of faith. So, South Park has always had this tremendous strength as community. And kids need to know that there are others like themselves. I mean, why we're working so hard in terms of our ministry, whether it's local or online or with camps or whatever, it's to let these Jewish kids know they're not the only Jewish kid that believes in Jesus, and they can live Jewish life and they can have a Jewish future they can envision for themselves. Actually marrying another Jewish believer, actually living Jewish life, because they can see that in other people. That's really important. So believers need to see that. You mean, if I'm working, pick somebody, because I really don't know that too many of you guys really, but if you're a guy and you're, a business person, and you know that everyone around you is, has an ethical grayscale, but they're at church and they meet a successful businessman who's absolutely straight with the Lord in the way he does his business dealings, that's highly motivational for them to follow God in their business dealings and to not be like everybody else with the grayscale. You know what I'm saying? So we need communities that model God's values, God's ethics that young people can see.
And Rabbi Gliebe, that also, thank you. First of all, I've so appreciated your sharing. And I guess what the Holy Spirit was sharing with me was kind of the flip side of that radical faith, which are the pitfalls, I think, that I've seen as a theme throughout all of today, and also in the sermon today, which was like one, like the dangers of assimilation, so extinction by assimilation, forgetfulness, and then just like those are themes that I've seen so far all of today as dangers. And I think any of us, I think it's so easy for any of us to fall into one or all three of those, which would be the opposite of living a radical faith.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share, like, that's what the Holy Spirit is sharing to me as you've been sharing. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Baruch Hashem. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to run off the
Okay,
Buffalo Grove.
one last comment, which is that if anyone here or at South Park Church is interested in hearing more about your ministry, or I don't know if you send out a newsletter or a blog or something, could you maybe, when you send me the slides to be posted, could you also include contact information if we want to be added to any kind of list or prayer list that you may have?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send that out. I have a blog, obviously. We have a newsletter we send out. I'll send a flyer on the Israel trip if anybody's interested. But if I can be of any help or encouragement, feel free to contact me. And if you have Jewish friends that you're trying to share with, and maybe you have some questions and need some help or whatever, let me know. All right.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
God
Thank you.
bless you guys.
Okay, take care.
Have a very wonderful March, a happy Passover, and a wonderful Resurrection Day as well.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Okay, Frank is going to turn off the recording now.